My family humiliated me for years in their real estate company, but I built my own empire in secret. And when I won Chicago's biggest awards, my father offered millions for my company, but I turned him down. I'm 32 years old. I work in real estate, and for years my family thought I was basically a failure. Like, you know, the middle child who was never going to accomplish anything important. My father, Philip Mercer, is one of the biggest names in the Chicago real estate market. You know, one of those guys who appears in business magazines and everyone in the industry knows. My older brother Elijah is his perfect clone, his golden heir, and my younger sister Beatrice is the family princess, the one everyone adores because she's pretty and charismatic and says the right things at the right moments. And I was in the middle, literally invisible to them. The one who never had anything interesting to say, according to my father, the one who was always interrupting when I tried to participate in business conversations. What they didn't know, what none of them had any idea about, was that for the past few years I had been building my own real estate empire, one that was about to make theirs look small. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I grew up in this family where money and real estate were literally the only things anyone talked about. Family dinners weren't about how your day went at school or if you had friends or what made you happy. No, they were disguised business meetings where my father and Elijah discussed properties, markets, investment strategies. My mother died when I was like 12, cancer. And after that, my father threw himself completely into work. And Elijah, who was 17 at the time, basically became his mini version. Beatrice was like 9 and was the baby, so everyone protected and pampered her, and I was there in the middle, trying to find my place, trying to get someone to see me. I remember trying to participate in conversations. I had read about a commercial property that I thought would be a good investment. And when I tried to mention it at dinner, my father literally cut me off mid-sentence and kept talking to Elijah like I hadn't said anything. That happened constantly. You know what I mean? It's not that they were actively cruel. It was worse. It was like I simply didn't exist. I studied business administration with a focus on real estate, obviously, because it was what I knew, what I had breathed my whole life. I graduated with honors, thought that maybe that would make my father take me seriously, that maybe he'd give me a chance at Mercer Enterprises. And technically he did give me a job, but it was basically glorified paperwork, you know, reviewing contracts, filing documents, things any assistant could do. They never invited me to important meetings, never asked my opinion on strategic decisions. Once, I must have been like 26 at the time, I managed to sneak into a strategy meeting. I arrived early and sat at the conference table like I had every right to be there. My father looked at me weird but didn't say anything at first. They started discussing expanding into the luxury condo market in the West Loop, and I had been researching that area for months, honestly, because it interested me, and because I thought they'd eventually take me seriously if I knew what I was talking about. So, in the middle of the meeting, Elijah was saying something about focusing on international buyers, and I raised my hand, literally like I was in school. How embarrassing, thinking about it now. And said I had seen the demographic data, and that the real market wasn't international buyers but professional millennials who were starting to earn good money and wanted to live near the Loop but couldn't afford downtown prices. I had a whole presentation on my laptop, graphs and everything. My father looked at me, and I swear I saw something in his eyes, like boredom or annoyance. I'm not sure. And he said, "Rosalind, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but the adults are talking now. Why don't you go back to your office?" The adults. I was 26 years old, had a college degree, had been working at the company for 3 years, and he basically called me a child. Elijah laughed, like a condescending little chuckle, and the other executives in the room avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable but saying nothing. I left that room and went to the bathroom and cried. I'm not going to lie. I cried for like 15 minutes. But afterwards, while I was washing my face and looking at myself in the mirror, something changed. It wasn't like a cinematic revelation. You know, it was more like a cold rage that settled in my chest. I thought, you know what? If they're not going to give me a chance, if they're never going to take me seriously, then I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to build something so big they can't ignore me. And I'm going to do it without their help, without their name, without anything from them. That afternoon, I started running numbers in my apartment. I had inherited some money from my mother, like $100,000 that I had been keeping untouched, and I had saved almost all my salary from Mercer Enterprises because, well, I lived in a cheap apartment and didn't spend much. I had like $150,000 total. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start, if I was smart. I spent the next few months researching everything I could about undervalued properties in Chicago. I focused on areas that my father and Elijah completely ignored because they considered them too risky or not prestigious enough. Neighborhoods that were in the process of gentrifying but hadn't exploded yet. Logan Square, Pilsen, parts of Humboldt Park. I bought my first property like 6 months after that humiliating meeting. A 3-unit building in Logan Square that needed remodeling but was on a street I knew was going to take off. I bought it for $120,000, spent $20,000 fixing it up, and rented it out at a price that gave me a 15% annual return. It wasn't spectacular, but it was mine, completely mine, and nobody in my family knew anything. The problem was I couldn't do this alone, not if I wanted to really grow. I needed a partner, someone who could be the public face of the business while I worked behind the scenes, because if my family found out I was building my own real estate company, they were going to sabotage me, I'm sure, or at least they were going to make everything more difficult. I met Sophia Tran at a real estate networking event I went to without telling anyone in my family. She was like 30 at the time, incredibly charismatic, the type of person who walks into a room and everyone turns to look at her, you know? She had worked in luxury sales but wanted to start her own firm. We hit it off immediately. There was something about the way she talked about the business that made me trust her. I told her my situation one night over wine at my apartment, explained who my family was, why I needed to stay anonymous. And she not only understood, but loved the idea. She said it would be like being a ghost, a secret genius behind the empire. We formed Tran and Partners 6 months later. I put up the initial capital and all the strategy, all the market analysis, all the investment decisions. Sophia was the official CEO, the face of the company, the one who went to client meetings and industry events. We started slow, buying multifamily properties in emerging areas, selling them when the market went up, reinvesting the profits. My family had no idea. At family dinners, which I still had to endure every 2 weeks or so, my father and Elijah kept talking about their big projects, about the office buildings they were developing, about the millionaire clients they were attracting. Beatrice talked about her social events and her vacations in Europe. And when they asked me what I was doing, which was rare, honestly, I told them I was still working at Mercer Enterprises doing the same old thing, and they nodded without really listening and continued with their conversations. The ironic thing is, I kept working at Mercer Enterprises for like 2 more years after starting Tran and Partners. I needed the stable income while building the business. And besides, it was useful to have inside access to what my father and Elijah were doing, what areas they were ignoring, where they were focusing their resources. I used all that information to do exactly the opposite of what they did. When they focused on luxury commercial properties downtown, I bought residential in the neighborhoods. When they ignored young buyers, I built communities designed specifically for millennials and Gen Z. I finally quit Mercer Enterprises when Tran and Partners started generating enough money for me to live off it. My father barely noticed my resignation, basically told me he understood that maybe real estate wasn't for everyone and that he hoped I'd find something that made me happy. Elijah said something condescending about how not everyone has what it takes for this business. Neither of them asked what I was going to do next. The next 3 years were, I don't know how to describe it, like the most intense and satisfying of my life. Tran and Partners grew faster than I had dreamed. We had a portfolio of like 50 properties. We had developed 2 new residential projects that sold out completely in pre-sale, and we were starting to be recognized in the industry. Well, Sophia was being recognized. She appeared in business magazine articles, gave interviews about her investment philosophy, which was actually my philosophy that I had developed. I was happy staying in the shadows, honestly, because the success itself was enough for me. I didn't need public recognition, or so I thought. Family dinners became increasingly difficult to bear. My father had started making comments about how I looked tired, if I was eating well, if I had considered maybe going back to school to study something more suitable for me. Elijah, who was now officially the vice president of Mercer Enterprises, constantly bragged about the deals he was closing, the clients he was attracting. Once, at a particularly unbearable dinner, Beatrice innocently asked what I was working on lately. And when I said something vague about real estate consulting, Elijah literally laughed and said, "Consulting? Sure. That's what people say when they can't get a real job." My father smiled like amused and changed the subject. That night I drove home crying with rage, called Sophia and told her I needed a drink, and we ended up at a bar until 2 in the morning while I vented all my frustration. Sophia told me something that night that stuck with me. She said, "Rose," that's what she called me, "someday you're going to be able to tell them the truth, and when you do it's going to be glorious. But you have to wait for the perfect moment, the moment when it hurts the most, when it hurts them the most to realize how wrong they were." I wasn't sure that moment would come, but like a year and a half later, it came, and the Chicago Real Estate Association announced its annual awards. It was like the biggest event in the industry. All the heavy hitters were going to be there. Mercer Enterprises had won several awards over the years. My father had a whole shelf full of them in his office. Sophia called me one afternoon and told me that Tran & Partners had been nominated in 3 categories: Innovation in Residential Development, Best Emerging Firm, and Excellence in Community Development. I was shocked. Literally couldn't speak for like a minute. I asked her if we had any chance of winning, and she said that according to her contacts, we were favorites in at least 2 of the categories. And then, almost as if she had been planning it, which she probably had, she asked me if I was finally ready to come out of the shadows. I told her I didn't know, that I was afraid of how my family would react, that they'd try to ruin what we had built. Sophia reminded me that I couldn't touch me anymore, that Tran & Partners was successful and respected on its own merits, that I didn't need their approval or validation. She was right, obviously, but I was still terrified. We agreed that if we won any award, she would publicly acknowledge me during the acceptance speech, introduce me as her partner, and the real architect of the company's strategy. The plan was risky but perfect, because it would be in front of the entire industry, including my father and Elijah, who would definitely be there. The night of the gala arrived, and I was like physically sick with nerves. I put on an elegant black dress, but not too flashy. I wanted to look professional, but not like I was trying to get attention. I arrived alone. Sophia was already there working the room, networking as always. I saw my father and Elijah on the other side of the ballroom. They were with a group of other executives, all in their expensive suits and champagne glasses, laughing at something. My father saw me, made like an acknowledgement nod but didn't come say hi. Beatrice was there too, with her husband. She saw me and waved for me to come over. I went because not doing so would have been weird, and she hugged me and told me I looked pretty and asked if I was there with anyone. I told her I had come alone, and she made a face like "poor you" and said she should introduce me to some of her husband's single friends. I didn't tell her I was there for work, that I was technically part of one of the nominated firms, not yet. The ceremony started, and my heart was beating so loud I thought everyone around me could hear it. They announced the Innovation in Residential Development Award first, and when they said the winner is Tran & Partners, I literally got dizzy. Sophia went up on stage radiant, thanked the association, talked briefly about our philosophy of creating accessible and sustainable communities, and I swear, time stopped. She said, "But none of this would have been possible without my partner and the real genius behind Tran & Partners, Rosalind Mercer." She invited me to come up on stage while the entire ballroom went silent, like confused, and I stood up with trembling legs and walked toward the stage feeling like I was in a dream. From the stage I could see perfectly my father and Elijah. Their faces were like a mix of absolute shock and confusion. Literally, their mouths were open. Sophia passed me the microphone, and for a second, I didn't know what to say. But then I saw the expression on Elijah's face, like total disbelief, and something in me ignited. I said something like, "Thank you to the association for this incredible honor, and thank you to Sophia for being the best partner I could have asked for, and for having the courage to be the face of this company while I worked behind the scenes." And then, looking directly at where my family was, I said, "I also want to thank all those who told me I didn't have what it takes for this business, that the adults were talking, that I should find something more suitable for me. Turns out, I had exactly what it takes. I just needed the freedom to do it my way." There was applause and even some uncomfortable laughter from people who clearly knew who my family was, and I came down from the stage feeling simultaneously euphoric and terrified. We won another award that night, Best Emerging Firm, and this time my speech was shorter and more professional, but the damage, or the truth rather, was already done. After the ceremony, I was at the bar ordering a drink I desperately needed when my father appeared next to me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just ordered a whiskey, and we stood there side by side in uncomfortable silence. Finally, he said, "Your mother would be proud," and that took me completely by surprise because he never, ever mentioned my mother. I asked him why he never gave me a chance, why he made me feel invisible all these years. He took a long sip of his whiskey and said he honestly didn't have a good answer, that he had been so focused on preparing Elijah to take control of Mercer Enterprises that he didn't see what he had right in front of him, that he had assumed I wasn't interested because I never fought hard enough. I told him I did fight, that I tried 1,000 times and that he just was never willing to listen. We moved to the terrace because the conversation was getting more intense and I didn't want everyone watching us. My father admitted he had been an idiot, that he had completely underestimated my capabilities, that the strategy we had used at Tran and Partners was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Mercer Enterprises needed. And then, and this left me speechless, he said he wanted to make things right, that he wanted to acquire Tran and Partners and merge it with Mercer Enterprises, make me an executive partner, give me the role I should have had from the beginning. He was offering an obscene amount of money, like double what the company was worth by any reasonable valuation. For a second, I'm not going to lie, I was tempted. It was everything I had wanted for years, wasn't it? My father's recognition, a seat at the table, being seen as an equal. But then I thought about the last 4 years, about all the nights working until 3 in the morning building something from scratch, about Sophia and the freedom to make our own decisions without having to report to anyone, about all the times my father had made me feel small and insignificant. And I realized I didn't need his validation anymore, that I had already built something better than anything he could offer me. I told him thanks, but no, that Tran and Partners was mine and Sophia's, that we had built it without his help and we weren't going to hand it over now that we were finally successful. My father looked at me like surprised, as if he genuinely couldn't conceive that someone would reject his offer, and said to think about it, that the offer would be on the table. I told him there was nothing to think about, that I had made my decision years ago when I decided to do it alone. That was like 3 months ago. Since then, my relationship with my family is weird, like cordial but distant. My father calls me every once in a while to talk about business, asks my opinion on things, which is ironic considering he never cared about my opinion before. Elijah is clearly resentful, barely talks to me at family gatherings, but that doesn't bother me as much as I thought it would. Beatrice thinks the whole situation is dramatic but fascinating, constantly asks me about the business like it's a reality show. Tran and Partners keeps growing. We just closed a deal to develop an affordable condo complex in Bronzeville that's going to be our biggest project to date. Sophia and I are considering expanding to other cities, maybe Minneapolis or Milwaukee first, then who knows. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been, like if my father had taken me seriously from the beginning. If he had given me a chance at Mercer Enterprises when I asked for it, I'd probably be trapped there, being forever the middle child trying to prove her worth, living under his shadow and Elijah's. Instead, I built my own shadow, I guess, and turns out it's pretty big. Last week, I was reviewing quarterly numbers with Sophia and realized that Tran and Partners generated more profit this quarter than Mercer Enterprises did last year. I haven't told my father. I don't need to. Success speaks for itself, and turns out that after years of silence, I finally have a lot to say.